Welcome back. Great to have you with us on The Full View. Some international news now. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has arrived in Germany to meet his counterpart, Angela Merkel. He's expected to ask for the Irish backstop plan to be scrapped, something that European leaders like Merkel have resisted. This ahead of the UK's scheduled departure or Brexit soon. SABC News' correspondent Ira Spitzer joins us from Berlin. Ira, thank you very much. Describe his reception thus far.
Well, it was quite a dramatic scene at the Chancellery here in Berlin. Upon Boris Johnson's arrival, there were some pro-European or anti-Brexit protesters, not many, but some had gathered there and were chanting things like "Stop Brexit." So kind of a signal about just how important this meeting is between these two leaders, both for the countries as well as certainly for the British population, since the Brexit question is hanging over almost everything having to do with the UK and the EU at this point. So with all that being said, it was, I would say, in their statements before going into talks that there was a fairly optimistic tone between the two leaders, Angela Merkel suggesting that perhaps a solution to the tricky question of the Irish backstop could even be agreed to within 30 days. So that was perhaps a bit of a surprise. But with that being said, in order for that to happen, it's pretty clear that the UK and Boris Johnson would have to be the ones at this point to suggest how that could even be possible. And we haven't really heard anything yet to indicate any solutions that would actually work, but still a lot of curiosity and interest right now into whether there perhaps could be some movement on that Irish backstop issue.
Okay, so that means Angela Merkel could be open to talking about the backstop issue, which has been a sticking point for the larger sort of Brexit deal. Could it then be key to opening up new negotiations?
Well, Angela Merkel, as well as the European Union itself, certainly would not refer to it as renegotiating the withdrawal agreement. The way that Merkel described it was more along the lines of if, that the backstop was simply a placeholder because they couldn't agree on exactly what to do as they continued to negotiate the terms of the post-Brexit trade agreement. But there was some scope, it seems, to define that relationship somewhat differently, or at least the potential Irish border situation somewhat differently in the form of a change to the political declaration. So not a renegotiation of the withdrawal agreement, but rather a change to the declaration there.
Yeah. In short, if you can you explain the whole backstop issue, which Boris Johnson calling that backstop anti-democratic?
Right. Well, if the UK were to crash out of the EU without a deal, that would then lead to potentially a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, which would go against the Good Friday Agreement between those two sides, which is obviously an important agreement for the United Kingdom. So that is what Boris Johnson has objected vehemently to, is using this Irish backstop as a potential way to change the Good Friday Agreement or to introduce border controls unilaterally from the EU side onto the UK-Irish border there. So the backstop would only be in the event that some other agreement could not be reached. That would be sort of a default position between the two sides, a default position which the United Kingdom is saying that they will not accept under any circumstances.
And the EU is saying a backstop is needed if there's a hard Brexit. You need the border. So upping the ante ahead of a possible hard Brexit.
Right, exactly. The The timetable right now, they are supposed to leave the European Union on October 31st. So the calculation from the UK side seems to be that the threat of the no-deal Brexit and the potential economic havoc that would wreak for the European Union, although it certainly would also reap havoc on the UK. But the calculation seems to be that the threat of a no-deal Brexit could be enough to provide some movement on certain key issues, including the Irish backstop question. We'll have to see what happens.
What about their relationship? There must be speculation in the press. Have they met before? Any scenes of Angela Merkel and Boris Johnson together, sort of indicating how they feel about one another?
Well, it's always hard to try and gauge a personal relationship in the context of these serious political arrangements that are going on. We did see some humor from Boris Johnson at one point when he opened the press conference, actually saying about coming to an agreement on the Irish backstop using the German phrase "Wir schaffen das," and that is a phrase that Angela Merkel famously used in describing the refugee crisis. It means we can do this, we can achieve this. So use that phrase, injecting a bit of humor into the press conference. But while Merkel seemed fairly jovial, I would say, behind the scenes, I'm certain that she and other leaders are certainly concerned about not knowing exactly what kind of leader they may be dealing with in Boris Johnson at the head of the UK.
And there's been a lot of speculation about her health. She's been seen shaking in public. Does that continue raising concern about how long she will be in office?
Right. There were 3 separate incidents of apparently uncontrollable shaking this year from Angela Merkel, but the last one was over a month ago, I believe, and since then we haven't really had any more updates on the Chancellor's health. It certainly is perhaps a concern, although she herself downplayed those concerns. But whether she is having health issues or not, we do know that her term at the helm of Europe's largest economy will come to an end one way or the other in the next couple of years. She said that in 2021 she will step down at the end of her term, although some people think because of some of the domestic issues with the coalition here that we could see her perhaps step down sooner. But again, we won't know anything about that anytime soon. They're due in October to assess the progress of Germany's coalition.
All right, final question for you, Ira. Given what's happened thus far, does this sort of raise hope that a hard deal Brexit could be avoided? Have there been enough signs to kind of change the bets a little bit?
Well, I think we're going to see a lot of reporting along those lines in the wake of that press conference. But I think when you look at what was actually said, especially from the German side, we really don't see much of a change of position. Germany says that the withdrawal agreement won't be reopened. Of course, there's a little bit of wiggle room to find a potentially different solution on the Irish backstop. But I think until there's any ideas out there that really make sense or really could even be considered acceptable to either side, and we haven't, as far as I'm aware, heard any of those ideas yet, I don't think there should be too much reason for optimism. But that being said, it was a fairly friendly press conference, so perhaps a sign of willingness to at least engage with the adversary at this point.
All right, thank you very much, our correspondent in Berlin, Ira Spitzer.